That is a question.
Yes.
Yes.
Any announcements and communications?
I have a couple. Thanks to MAP and Diane Durrett and volunteers and all the people at Pollination Celebration. It was such a beautiful day, and it was kind of all the things I love about Pine Lake kind of in one package, in one moment. So that was really lovely. And then kind of overdue, I should have mentioned this last month, but Courtney and I did a walkthrough of the commercial district a month ago-ish. Met a lot of business owners, just was really sweet to make some connections. Some fun facts about the business district is the pawn shop has been in business for 50 years, which I think is really impressive. And then, like 3 doors down, is a very new Haitian restaurant, Amicia's, Chief, have we decided? I might not be pronouncing it right. They've been in business for like just over a year. So really cool to see, just the like longevity and then also the newness kind of all packed in the commercial district. And also, I got a call from Howard like 2 weekends ago, who is the new owner of Silvers, which is in the former Mangoes space. And they're open, ready to go. I'm going there later this week. So looking forward to that.
Thank you. Any other announcements and communications? I will throw one in. Councilmember Torrent and I are attending tomorrow through Friday the Georgia Municipal Association Small Cities Conference, which is for cities, is it below 7,000? Under 10. More in line with some of the dynamics and targeted trainings to what we deal with as a small city. So we will be there for the next 3 days. All right. Any other announcements? Do we have an adoption of the agenda? A motion?
I move that we adopt the agenda.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, this is now the opportunity for the first round of public comments. Please come on up to the podium, adjust the microphone to your height, or state your name and your address. Thank you.
Melanie Hammett, 648 Laurel Road. Just what you guys already know, the governor has signed Senate Bill 33, and so it is imperative more than ever that Pine Lake is in the meetings that the other small cities are already having, started playing offense and now playing defense. And I don't need to preach to Mayor Pro Tem Goldberg about the importance of being in these meetings, because I know he already knows this, but I just wanted to put it on the record that if we are not in the meetings, we don't stand a chance. So I appreciate presence when it is there, and I notice presence when it is not there, which is often called absence, actually. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Public comment, come on up and share your 3 minutes worth of public comment. Come on up.
How are y'all doing?
Good, good, hello.
My name is Janae Harris. I address 7224 Teakwood Place, so it's not in Pine Lake, but I actually work in the county, DeKalb County, and I just wanted to bring a little bit of attention to preventative measures and also intervention measures that are being put in through local nonprofits, CVI organizations towards the teen takeovers that are taking place. And so I just wanted to say that there have been correspondences to city members and also Mayor Pro Tem. And just we would like to see like your thoughts on that and how we can implement, as DeKalb County has been a proclaimed county of peace since 2025 June. So yes, that's all that I wanted to share. And I'll be sending out more if you all are interested, and I'll be back here for the duration of the meeting if there's any communication I can have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And feel free to leave if you have a business card if we don't get to talk to you. Thanks. Any other public comment? Going once, going twice. Thank you. We will have an additional public comment after the new business, which we will start now. So new business item number 1, the mural and art project, a discussion. And I believe we have some information in our packet as well. And Ms. Hammett, I believe this is you.
It is.
Welcome back.
Thank you. So I want to give you a little bit of context for this 20,000 that you just adopted last council meeting, I believe. About 3.5, maybe even 4 years ago, I had a meeting with then Commissioner Bradshaw and made a request for basically a grant. And he gave the city $20,000 for 2 separate projects. And then the $20,000 went into the large and then the small intestine of DeKalb County, possibly never to be seen again until Mayor Brandy Hall, at the 11th hour, managed to extricate it. So we have the $20,000. Again, this was 3.5, possibly 4 years ago, which is probably an important detail, which I'll refer to later. Okay, so there are 2 projects, and I got the budget for one of the projects from Rob Witherspoon, who does public art procurement for the city of Atlanta. So he's a pretty good resource for about how much things cost. So at that time, the $10,000 for the mural piece of the project was a pretty good estimate. Okay, and both of the projects, and you have the description in your packet of the second project, but both of the projects were designed to do 2 or 3 things. Okay, the first was to bring Arts Natural Habitat, our brand, so to speak, although I hate the word, from Ridge to Rockbridge. Okay, so both of those projects will do exactly that. And that's a big deal because you don't see Arts Natural Habitat in evidence on Rockbridge or in sort of the apron of the entrance to the residential district. But the second piece, which is equally important, is an opportunity and a necessity to collaborate with 2 parts of our community that we seldom interface with. One is the business district, and Councilperson Kohler, I appreciate what you and Courtney have done, or beginning to do. And then the second is our church community. And it's necessary for these projects to succeed that both of those communities are engaged. So that's kind of an exciting piece of, a built-in piece of these 2 projects. Now, I'm not going to dwell on the details of the mural project, except to say that I got back in touch with Rob Witherspoon, and that $10,000 that was appropriate 3.5, 4 years ago is now more like a $15,000 or $20,000 project. So set that aside over here. Additionally, the organization and execution of that project really needs, I know Chief Green has stepped forward to kind of manage that, and I know that you have a council person who has made inroads into the business community and also is doing some connection through the ARC comprehensive plan, has connected with the church community a little bit. So I would suggest Councilperson Kohler interface with the chief. I know they've already been in conversation, and the chief has a description of the mural project and the pieces that are necessary to put it together. At the time, we thought the money was going to come through in a reasonable time frame. We had assembled a working group that included several of the business owners on Rockbridge so that they would be in ownership of whatever ended up on the wall. Okay, part 2, the second project. You have in your packet, let's start with the survey. So this is a survey of the church parking lot that is the kind of the freestanding church parking lot. I don't know if, probably Jeff, you're the only person who lived, I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem, you're the only person who lived here long enough ago to remember that beautiful tree that used to be what you saw when you drove in.
Yep.
Well, it's gone. And so what you see when you come in, the kind of the primary residential entrance is the parking lot. And over many years, we made attempts to approach the church about the purchase of the parking lot to no avail or to no reasonable sum. And I realized, actually in a dream, which tells you what kind of person I am, I realized in a dream that Pine Lake owned the right-of-way. So if you're dreaming of right-of-ways, then you're a very strange person. So The highlighted portion of this survey is the right-of-way that fronts Poplar Road. It happens that, weirdly, that is also an unusually wide right-of-way, okay? Typically, right-of-ways, I think, are 36 inches, and this one is a 4-foot right-of-way. It has been marked, and the markings are still there, and I'm going to tell you why this right-of-way, how it will be put into use. The markings are still there, and we ran tests to make sure that there weren't any underground utilities. I met last week with Mr. Kendrick and walked him through all of this, and he's going to do another test just to make sure that there are no underground utilities that, I don't know, have sneaked in the last few years. But here's the point of that apron. So the idea for that second $10,000, which also may be a little under what we need, is to create a modular exhibition system. Okay, so the simplest visual that is not like what this would look like, but as close as you can get. I don't know how many of you are familiar with my front yard and the sort of modular sections of the fence that's in the front yard. Okay, so I've got 3 panels of fence, and we did it that way because the land slopes, and if you build a continuous fence, then you get either a fence that slopes or a fence that gets taller and taller and taller and taller. Okay, that parking lot slopes in one direction, which is down Poplar, and also backward. Okay, so there's 2 slopes to deal with. The idea is you would create a metal framework in sections and also in graduated sections, and I don't mean organized gradual sections, but some would be taller and some would be smaller. And what they would be built to do is to accommodate a rotating gallery of artwork. So it could be, we did meet with a metal worker at the time just to kind of start getting ideas. And the poles for this structure would be sunk into the asphalt. And you drill down in the asphalt and then you sink them in the asphalt. And so you have a series of frames that accommodates the slope both ways, accommodates wind resistance, and that's more a function of the materials of the art itself, accommodates the ingress-egress of what's parked on that parking lot, and also accommodates the sight lines of the stop sign. And originally Chief and I met about where that needs to begin. So these are things that have to be taken into consideration. You see the sort of description of the ethos of this Gateway Gallery. But my thought is that one would meet with a number of different metal workers to sort of start getting a concept of a frame that doesn't look terrible when it's empty, right? And a framework, a series of frames that would be multi-purpose enough to accommodate different kinds of art, whether it be ribbon art so it moves, or solid art so it's stationary, or banner art, or kids art, or whatever. So that is not an expertise of mine, and when we met with the original metal worker, it was just beginning the idea of the structure. And I've got the design notes in your packet. These are not the design notes for the design. These are just sort of a way of imagining what could be there. But that's what the second 10,000 is for, and at the time we were discussing this, 10,000 was going to be right at the top end of what we could afford to do. So I'm guessing that it's no longer a $10,000 project. But that's what the 20K was for, is to bring Arts Natural Habitat to the apron of the city and to the commercial district. I also know that at the time we talked about this, Tom Ramsey's son-in-law is also a metal worker. So we have different metal workers to at least consult with and get ideas from to see how we could accommodate the most versatile styles of artwork, the least industrial or just stupid looking, frankly, frames when they're empty, the modular set. So in and of itself, it could look like something when nothing's in it. And so if you'll notice, if you walk by my yard, the panels are not just 3 panels so that you don't notice the landfall. They're also set back from each other, and they happen to be set back at about a 4-foot interval, which is exactly what this is. It's a 4-foot interval, so that's sort of visually interesting. So that's a very simplistic example of what I'm talking about. It's actually almost useless, but not quite. So if you walk by my yard, you can kind of see an extremely rudimentary conception of what I'm talking about. Anyway, I think that's pretty much it. I know the chief has notes that she worked on for the mural, but I think the mural is pretty straightforward conceptually. There's a wall and you put paint on it and it's a mural. But do you have any questions?
As it stands now, given the delay, given the changes in cost during that time, are we obligated to do both? Or if the costs of one preclude doing the other, is that okay?
Well, I talked to Ned this morning, and he is checking to see, because this falls under tourism, is that what, Ned, what we...
During our casual conversation, I was unsure whether the small cities IGA has a provision for tourism investment, or if that was rather the second round of SPLOST. But my thought was that if there's SPLOST funding available, that may be an opportunity to offset the cost of doing both projects if they've increased.
So that's one thought. That's one thought. So the second thought is to seek another funding source, separate from the city's own SPLOST funding. In other words, I would suggest that both projects be funded before you dump one in favor of the other. That's my suggestion.
As we start this conversation, I also want to make sure maintenance is part of our long-term thinking. What the upkeep would be for a mural and frames, as well as who's going to be responsible for selecting, putting up, and taking down any temporary art. So that's kind of a more internal note for going forward.
So in response to, this is sort of a maintenance answer. One reason that we visualized frames of interest is because when they sit empty, they could still be interesting to look at. That's a form of maintenance, because we have a structure that was designed to hold art, and it is the fence in front of Public Works, okay? And there's been art on that, and it also has spotlights for the art that's on that Public Works fence. And since you've moved here, how many times have you seen art on the fence? You get my point. So it functions perfectly well as a Public Works fence. So my interest in seeing what this modular framework looks like is that if it's standing empty, it's not just like, what the heck is that? That's a form of maintenance.
And that's in the design.
Yes.
Other questions?
One of my first interactions with Pine Lake was seeing artwork on that wall, so I'm very excited about this project. Who would own and decide what goes into those fences?
I think that's really where another layer of opportunity comes in. You can probably already see how the interactions with the church around, we're taking the right of way and we're putting an installation there. That needs to be handled conversationally, not authoritatively. So that can lead to all kinds of conversations from there, but I could see, a curator being appointed. We did have a curator appointed for the Public Works at Public Works, is what we call that wall. And it is a lot of work. So my suggestion is that the budget for the Gateway Gallery include the first installation of art, so that you have time, so it's clear, this is what's happening here, not just what are these weird structures. This is clear, this is what's happening here, and then you have time to figure out how these rotating art exhibits happen. Because it's work, it's definitely work to do that.
I'm sorry, Councilman Torn, if I can interject. You also are going to have to navigate the type of forum that you're going to create with this project. If you create a limited purpose public forum, then you have a little bit more freedom to navigate and restrict the kinds of speech that is allowed. If it is not regulated or not identified as limited purpose, it becomes a general purpose public forum, which means you have no control over what gets published or printed or presented.
Right.
So there's going to be some thought, not just in who decides, but what are the parameters the council is going to impose on what is decided.
And I would think there'd be some sensitivity to the fact this is a church parking lot as to what kind of art would go up there, but I wouldn't think it would be all that different from what would be just beautiful artwork.
My concern is last Pride, members of that church pulled up advertisements for Pride Lake that were just rainbow and destroyed them, even though they were in the right-of-way. And so I think having to limit that to appease the church, I think it's going to be an interesting tightrope to walk.
I think, again, we don't have relationships there, and it's been very difficult. We had a really good relationship, and then that leadership changed, and then we had a iffy relationship, and then that leadership changed. And I think, that's just something that the elected officials have to serve. Just is what it is. So this is the opportunity to continue to forge a leadership engagement. And you'll probably make a really good one, and that leadership will change again, and then you'll start all over. So that's what I predict.
Other questions?
I have a few. Thanks so much, Melanie, for staying with us. You're retired, so I like to think of it. But we're really fortunate that you and Brandy both really stayed with us over the years, because I think this is just a really amazing opportunity, and just is going to do a lot of placemaking for the city. And I met the pastor. He was at the ARC meeting that Jane and I and Ned and several people attended. And I think there's totally lots of opportunity to
Right.
connect with him and find the way to navigate that respectfully, and especially giving the church advance notice and bringing them into the conversation. So I think there's just a lot of potential. I think most of my questions got answered. And while I'm double checking, I'll also mention that in anticipation of this, I emailed Living Walls, which is this amazing organization. They mostly operate kind of in the city, I would say, kind of closer in town than out here that I've seen. And I hadn't seen their site in a while. They don't list a lot of municipalities and government organizations as their clients, and maybe that's just because they're trying to focus on businesses. But anyways, I reached out to them. I haven't heard back yet. But
Did
I
they
think
do the Scottsdale murals?
I'm not sure.
I thought that they did.
They
but I'm not
might.
positive. Yeah.
It's a huge list at this point. It's, just on and on and on for all the years that they've been around. But they have a huge network of muralists, and I just think that, between them and Alternate Routes and all these arts organizations, we're going to have a lot of opportunities to connect with artists and hopefully find people who can work with our budget restrictions and all
Right.
of that. I think my only question is just whether anyone ever made any concept renderings of this, any sort of sketches.
the mural?
No, of the gallery structure
The renderings were
printed on
not,
napkin.
they were not useful. If you took a sheet of graph paper and you did, here's a short horizontal one, and here's a tall
Okay.
one, and here. So if I knew where they were and I handed them to you, they would be less than useful. They'd pull you in the wrong direction.
Okay.
They're about as aesthetic as this dais.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. And I just got appointed to the DeKalb County Council for the Arts, newly formed, so hopefully that'll give me the ability to help out with this as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think everybody pretty much covered all of my questions, so.
okay.
Well, I would just reiterate the thank you to both you and Brandy Hall for, 3 years later, money shows up. That's a testament to determination and persistence and stubbornness, maybe. I don't know. It worked. So thank you for that. I think both are an opportunity. One of the things that has come up in a couple of meetings I've been to recently is the whole notion of you have arrived.
Right,
And we have nothing that says that.
right.
And it's like, you've arrived and you're already gone. So how do we create use this as an opportunity to really make a statement? And both are different arrival points.
For sure.
So I think that's just a really great opportunity. Plus, I also love the notion of this as a chance to reach out to and foster relationships. I'm not going to say rebuild because some of them are new people.
Right.
In the community. And so it's again, I think we need to also remind everyone that Pine Lake doesn't start once you turn off of Rockbridge Road. It starts at Rockbridge Road.
Correct.
So I'm excited to figure out how we do that and reach out to more of the business leaders and start building that, because we want to support them.
Yep.
If we help them drive economic development, then they bring us more funds.
Absolutely.
So, thank you.
All right. Yes.
This may be more of a question or discussion for the council. I think this is a different type of project. So next steps is what comes to my mind. So I want to make sure that I understand the council's expectations of the driver for next steps. Is this something to be driven by staff, or is this something that you want driven by the community?
I can tell you what we did. We had a council liaison that was connected to the business community. That was Augusta Woods. And I know Chief Green has talked about being part of that. I don't know who you all would choose as a liaison, but I think Councilperson Kohler is already a few steps ahead on this as well. But I think that Chief Green has identified some folks who would be necessary to be part of a committee. Innocent Wafer, for example, whose business is right across the street. And maybe Augusta Woods again, I don't know, but that's a piece of the driver. Obviously, the administration would have to be.
Yeah, we support, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. But that's my 2 cents, and I don't have money in the game like these folks do.
So my sense is, I think that's something TBD. We need to figure that out and talk about that. But to me, this is a collaborative process. This is a great opportunity for collaboration on many different fronts.
Correct.
So
I think it is, but I also think it takes a specific directed person, like having something open-ended of like all 5 of us equally on it is not going to get things done as easily as having a point person who's reporting to everyone.
And when I say collaborative, I mean other members of our community.
Oh,
Not
absolutely.
within.
Yeah, of course.
So, yeah. So we need to put that on the agenda to discuss further how we work that out and how we structure it.
Sure.
So, thank you.
All righty. Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie.
All right. Item number 2, property taxes, digest and calculator process and schedule. City Manager Hawthorne.
Good evening, everyone. And Ned is going to put the reference pages from the strategic performance report. Before getting to, and this will be a fairly quick presentation, but it has nothing to do, the brevity of the presentation, with the importance of the exercise that will lead to a decision by the city council, starting as early as your next regular meeting, May 26th. And it does have some gravity, I guess you could say, that goes along with it. And that has been a major part of our discussions leading up to this month of May, really talking about the financial sustainability of Pine Lake. And we've explored various options. One of the options that we did not explore, at least in the form of the strategic performance report, was homeowners association. We've had some passing discussion, and it just so happened that in the last few days, an article that I was reading in the Wall Street Journal hit a point for me. And the article dealt with homeowners associations across the country and how prolific they have become, particularly in certain states, but all across the nation. But it listed some stats, and don't take this number too seriously because I did further research from the article, but it condensed the average homeowners association fee. Of course, homeowners association also consists of condominiums in major urban areas, such as South Florida, which is my home. But it listed the median cost of those fees is not only homeowners associations becoming more popular, but cost and fees associated with it also have increased. But the average, according to the article, was $429 per month. For an area such as ours, it would be something lower than that because they all vary. But I did some quick math on the cost of that using that national average, where you're looking at around $5,000 per month for communities within local governments to provide for those services that are particular to their community. And I thought about public safety as one of those. And I happen to live in a community now that has a homeowners association and the concurrent fees. And public safety, as I understand it, is usually provided through hired security agencies as opposed to an actual law enforcement agency. The essence of what I'm trying to say is not a direct comparison, but kind of the wisdom, I guess you could say, that the four founders of Pine Lake had for as small of a community as it is today, around 700 to 750 in population, to go to that extraordinary length those many decades ago to incorporate. Because what comes with incorporation, and then when you apply it to a community as small as Pine Lake is even today, there are certain requirements, but there are also certain inherent benefits. When we talk about fees and revenues and property taxes, certainly preeminent, but we've got dozens of revenue sources, so much so that we're going to be continuing discussions on analyzing those different fee categories. And that goes with cityhood. And I could see for the type of services that we provide today with those supplemental sources, if we were a homeowners association, it has kind of kept the price down. So there's something to be said. Property taxes, no one likes them, particularly to increase them. But when it all comes down to it, it's all a game of relativity. How do we compare for what we have, and what those costs are and how they might compare? So just some food for thought from that quick article that I read. But we've talked about other options, and from my assessment, some are more viable than others in addressing the financial sustainability of Pine Lake, and we're kind of at that crossroads. At the top of the viability list, in my professional opinion, is, at least today, although more limited with SB 33, is the home rule authority that you have in controlling our fate, for as difficult of a decision as it may be. And that process has started with the 2026 property tax digest process. And it is an elaborate process. It is a complex process. It is a tedious process. And any missteps that we make could be consequential. And there's a learning curve, not only for you, but of your staff that supports you. In fact, I'm thinking of back a year ago, and it was the first full property tax process that I had gone through in Georgia. And we had to do some redos last year. We ended up with more public hearings than were required because we had missed some of the requirements, whether advertising or the spacing out of the times. So it is a process that I wanted to make sure that with such a new council, that you at least had the information before you get started in this kind of prelude to the decision-making that will start at the next meeting. While some things that you will be approving at your May 26th meeting are set in stone, such as, well, I was going to say the schedule, but that's not set in stone either, because last year we had to make some changes in the middle of the process. But an issue of the property tax rate, which will be a part of the resolution that you consider, it's important that you remember that it is the beginning of the process and not the end. And so any decisions that you're making with regard to the property tax rate is tentative. But there is a rule by law that whatever you set it at for May 26th, you can only reduce it from there. So it is not unusual for cities to put in a higher number, and then recognizing that over the next several weeks and public hearings and more information that you'll be getting from staff and studying on your own, that you will have the ability to lower it. But if you start too low, it could put us in some jeopardy. So on page 2, just a few things that I want to highlight, and Ms. Hammett mentioned SB 33 at this point. At the time that I wrote this section, SB 33 had not been signed. But it has now. The original bill that was signed, I made reference to it on page 1. SB 566 was signed early by the governor, and it had some changes in it that weren't as far-reaching as SB 33. One of the things that we dealt with last year was HB, I believe it was 581, where the council elected as many cities across Georgia to opt out of a provision that would have placed a cap, an inflationary cap, on annual homesteaded valuation increases. And I will remind you that I shared in past SPRs and here at this podium that as you look back over the last 10 years, it hasn't been an issue of the property tax millage rate that has increased. It has actually declined somewhat steadily over the last 10 years, and only in 2024 was it boosted back up to the 19.4 mills. But at the same time, the revenues of Pine Lake have grown pretty significantly. A few short years ago, it was around $1 million, less than $1 million. And now if you look at our budget, we're at 1.5 million, with property tax being the most significant source. But the growth came from, and the revenues that go along with it, from those valuation increases. Two-sided sword, so to speak, as I pointed out before. It increased property tax levies on property owners in Pine Lake significantly, but it also increased the valuation of homes, which is a benefit that can't be denied over the long term in particular. So the market has recognized that the Pine Lake formula has worked. People want to be a part of this community, as small as it is. They want to be a part. There is a demand, and the market has shown that. So with SB 33, and this is only the start of property tax rate proposals, and even in this legislative session, some of the proposals were far more drastic than was approved. And I would say the way that we should look at those changes that didn't happen is that they were deferred. So I speculate that the legislature will continue to revisit this issue. But in the meantime, what we know has happened is SB 33 eliminates that opt-out provision that's not even a choice. Last May, that was the decision that the council approved, the opt-out. So that won't be a choice this year. And so if you look at it historically, particularly in the last 10 years, that 30% growth in valuations that increase revenues, which also afforded opportunities for Pine Lake to continue with those governance functionalities of the community, and so they were affordable. If you look 10 years into the future, with that freeze being on, even with it being just homesteaded, that is the most significant part of what we get from property taxes. So over time, that will have an effect, but it's also an issue that, at least for now, that the governing authority controls, because no such cap has been placed on the millage rate itself. So these will be tough decisions each year, no longer driven necessarily by valuation increases, but in order to keep up with the cost of services as you desire, that it will involve the millage rate itself. Now, the other provision that SB 33, and of course it's more complex, but I'm just going to focus on these couple of issues, is providing a sales tax option that would have to be voted on in a referendum, a 1% local homestead option sales tax. Now, as I have thought about this, and I even illustrated this in an explanation when I was giving you an update on SB 33 previously, it was in the context of the 1% if homesteaded taxation was removed from the city. And I gave you the comparison of what that 1% based on current formulas from SPLOS would generate, which is about $150,000 annually, compared to our many hundreds of thousands of dollars that would be lost from homesteaded values. But I don't know the answer to this question that I'm going to put forth. Given that our property tax as a whole is preserved at this point with only this inflationary cap on homesteaded properties, the 1% sales tax option, and if you assume that it was the same formula that we've got now for SPLOS, 150,000, compared to whatever loss that we have now or prospectively, I'm beginning to see that could that be somewhat of a silver lining? Control on property taxes for our homesteaded owners, but we still have this potential option of getting a 1% sales tax that could supplement our revenues. So it's a question at this point. We don't know all of the details of how this bill is going to be enacted. So that's kind of a stay tuned, but a potential silver lining. Now we have received, and this is the second paragraph on that page 2, on May 5th, the DeKalb County Office of the Tax Commissioner, they provided for us the early preliminary tax valuation for this year. This will be supplemented, possibly changed, when we get the May 15th actual data, which will be much more detailed than what I sent to you. But this is very interesting. And I've only had this conversation with the Mayor Pro Tem and I think the city clerk in our meeting last Wednesday preparing for the agenda. This is kind of mixed news. So what I reported to you from this report is that commercial, real and personal property values increase by 19%, 20%, let's say. And residential property valuation declined by 6%. When you put those two together, because we're so much more reliant on residential, overall, it's a 2.5% decline. Now, this is my theory, because I don't think this is just coincidental. I think this is the work, and I want to really recognize Mayor Pro Tem Goldberg, but the former council who took action by resolution to have the appraisal's office of the county to revisit this issue, and this council actually had a chance to probe them, Mr. Hicks, when he came and presented to you. Now, from my first days as city manager, Mayor Pro Tem Goldberg, Councilmember Goldberg at the time, and others of the council, this was a real issue for them. And Mayor Pro Tem would not leave this alone in particular. He authored the letter that he wanted sent, and ultimately we brought it before the council, and they approved it. I think it made a difference. I think Mr. Hicks went back and took a real look. And so this gave some relief to residential property owners, and probably the first time in many years, addressed some of the commercial real estate. And I would imagine I haven't looked at the detail, but I'd be surprised if the multifamily dwellings didn't get a shot, but I still need to verify some of that information. So this is good work of two governing bodies that I think have paid off, even though it has some mixed results, because it does result in less revenues for the city that will be coming in. Our preliminary estimates is we will overall lose around $21,000, and we can't afford to lose that, but that will be a part of your decision making and what we'll be factoring into recommendations. Now, I did want to compare 2025, just to give you an example of the kind of calculations that you will be given when we have more details of the property tax digest process. So in 2025, the overall valuation of Pine Lake property increased by 5.48. Now, I want to do a point-by-point comparison. In the next paragraph, I'm giving you a point-by-point comparison. Last year, 5.48% increase. In 2026, a 2.5% reduction. And then you have to do a calculation, something that is called the rollback rate. And I want to show you how that applied in this first paragraph based on 2025. So based on that millage rate, the current millage rate at the time of 19.4 that was originally approved in 2024, we have to calculate what is called a rollback rate. What is the millage rate that generates the exact amount of revenue as the previous year? And because it increased, the millage rate that the council started from was a lower millage rate, this 18.653. So even though we determined, and my recommendation last year was to leave the millage rate at 19.4, it counted as a property tax increase because it actually increased the numbers based on the higher valuation. So in 2026, based on these early preliminary numbers, it will be just the opposite. We're starting off with the reduction. So what is required to generate the exact amount of revenue as in 2025? It is this 19.883 mills. So that's higher than the 19.4, of course. What I can tell you, and I'm speaking from a millage rate standpoint, that administration, namely the city manager, will be recommending, and I listed May 12th in the original SPR that should have been May 26th, a tax millage rate increase. Now, I'm not revealing anything mysterious because I've kind of told you over the last couple of months where I was headed. But at a minimum, the 19.883 millage rollback to generate the same amount of revenue. So that is an increase in the millage rate itself. What you determine in the resolution that we put forth will determine the number of special public meetings that will be required, public hearings, namely. If there is an increase in the level of revenue itself, that automatically triggers a minimum of 3 public hearings. You can have more. Last year we had more, but that was because of some of the resets that we had to do, or the reset, wasn't multiple resets. Now, kind of corollary to your process and decisions, information is going out to residents and owners. On May 29th, all property owners across the county will receive their annual notice of assessment. And then over the next 45 days, appeals can be made, and appeals aren't unheard of. And so that will continue to affect our actual valuation up until the county actually starts to send our revenues in the fall of the year. But the decisions that you make before July 1st, on page 3 net, it's the final thing that I'm going to go over. The decisions that you make before July 1st, so those special meetings that will be set will be up until that time, will affect the revenue for 2026, because we will actually start to receive those revenues starting in September, after bills have been sent out in late summer. So there's a lot more to come on all of the details and the schedules and advertisements and notices that are required that we will be handling. We'll be getting it right, and advising you and having you to stamp ultimately the schedules of public hearings that you set. But I consider that, and these types of statements are always debatable, but I think your May 26th meeting, and there are other things that we'll be talking about later in this meeting that Stephen, our finance director, will be handling. But the combination will make May 26th probably, debatably, the most important meeting to date of this council. So I hope the education that we've tried to put forth over the last several months, not any recommendations that I'm going to be making that are taken likely, but it does come down to answering the question, what is it going to take to keep Pine Lake sustainable as a community? And what are those options that we have the most control over, or as difficult as the decisions may be? So that's all I have, but I'm certainly open to any questions or comments.
Thank you, City Manager Hawthorne. Let's start with Stephanie. If you have any questions, we'll work our way across the podium.
Thank you for all of this. It's just really helpful to get all of this, like a little bit of overlap, but then a little bit more every time, you know, because it is such a huge decision. And I have a literature degree, and I really feel it in moments like this, as far as all the finance side of things. So my question, just really briefly, because it's not specifically about millage, but when you mentioned the sales tax possibility at a later point, will there be at some point in that research thinking about the impact on the commercial district in terms of those, how that affects those businesses, you know, with stuff really close by potentially that has a lower rate?
Yeah, you know, when you think about the businesses that that are made responsible for levying sales tax is usually considered, not always, a pass-along tax.
Mhm.
They certainly have to account for it separately, and I believe that is a common known practice. And I think one of the benefits why even the legislature is looking to cut property tax or income tax, sees sales tax as an option to supplement or make up for, is because it's shared by guests and
Right.
visitors, you know,
Mhm.
who come into the state. But yes, it is a burden, but it's kind of I think divorced from actually hurting businesses if they choose to, and then those who actually pay it, it's more than us who just live in a particular area.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry. You had mentioned in talking about Rockwood Road and the business district there in an email earlier that their sales tax doesn't go to us. Is that, like, it goes to DeKalb and then we get a percentage of that?
Yes, so when you consider the overall sales tax for Georgia, and it varies according to jurisdiction because of these special taxes, but I'm going to say this from an assumption, a presumption standpoint, but the number may be off. But sales taxes primarily support the state government. Let's say that it's 6%. And then you've had these supplemental taxes, usually that come down to the county level and county determination. In the case of DeKalb, the two stages of SPLOS, SPLOS 1 and SPLOS 2. But even the state is responsible for collecting those as well. So those businesses actually account for them, send them up to the state, and then the state apportions back to the counties, including any special supplements such as SPLOS. So I would imagine that LHOST, as is phrased in SB 33, would work the same way. I'm just not sure what the formula would be. But it is in DeKalb County's case and its cities, it's split according to population. So not per se our businesses, but that shared pool, and then just split according to population.
Okay. So then if businesses were doing better and taking in more money, we wouldn't really see much of an increase returned to us.
From a sales tax perspective, yes. From a
If-
property tax perspective, I think there's a greater chance that the city would benefit.
There's just been this hope that if we build up the business district, we'll have more money because there'll be more sales, and then we'll get more sales tax from that. And I don't know that that's accurate. Is that?
Yeah, I think the premise, when you think about a downtown development authority, is really pertinent to the revenue sources that come directly to us. So whether it's property tax or other taxation, you know, that we've talked about that we need to revisit. In some cases, we actually have, and I'll use the case of franchise fees, utility franchises. Those businesses might not actually be in Pine Lake, but we've got a relationship with them, you know, hosting their utility poles or whatever the case is. And those fees are kind of determined based on the franchise agreement. I don't know when the last time was that we updated the agreement. There may be some room in the cap that's provided under state statute. In some cases, maybe you know, how Pine Lake has grown, annexed areas haven't been taken into account. So I think going back to the March strategic performance report, I think it's time for us to do a comprehensive review of all of our revenue. Kind of focus on property tax. This year I am going to be bringing something to you on special assessments, stormwater. I want to update that some. I think that will help us, you know, in this financial sustainability, but I'm going to let Stephen make that presentation up to you. And it's not just a matter of comparing, and I haven't counted the numbers. I say dozens, but you know, I wrote all of those narratives in the budget this year, so my eyes just came open, you know, to looking at the potential. And you know, the last time that these were thoroughly reviewed, it would be a disservice to say let's just compare to these other communities. These revenue sources are far deeper than that. They've got statute. There's some legal justification to them. There may be caps, and I believe we really need the benefit of an expert to do a comprehensive review. I know you all are going to be discussing, you know, maybe taking some and starting to review. And education is never a bad thing, but I think we're going to need to dive a little deeper to the benefit of, you know, the analogy that I gave earlier, our four founders. Let's take advantage of all of these sources that, yes, we may not revisit them annually, but there comes a time after 15 years that we probably need to look at some higher capacity, potentially.
And I guess finally, you had recommended, I think, a raise of 3 millage points previously. Is that still what your recommendation will probably be?
Yeah, 3 mills was a good rounded number before learning about the reduction. If I had to give you a number today, it would add another 0.5 mills to make up for the loss from the reduction in revenues. A half a mil would equal about the loss that I think Stephen gave me a calculation, and I shared a number with you that really just came from the Tax Commissioner's office of around 21,000. I think I've told you a millage rate is around 50,000. It's probably something less than 50,000. It certainly is less than 50,000 now based on our overall early preliminary estimate.
Okay. That's steep.
But that will be a number, and you know, I tend not to play games. You know, I could certainly go through and say to the council, you know, I need you to give yourself room, and maybe you should look at 4 mills, knowing that you could come down. Chances are what you're going to get from me is the number that I think is really, really needed. So if I had to give you a number today, it would be 3.5 mills.
It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt a lot of people. Go ahead.
Jane?
Yeah, I'm just concerned. I mean, I can afford it, but I worry about my neighbors who are on fixed incomes, who are longtime residents, who will be priced out of Pine Lake. And if we're trying to avoid gentrification, I just don't. It's going to be hard for me to support that.
Yeah, and just keep in mind that that's what the process allows for. You will have public hearings. Certainly, you know, we've been talking about this for the last several months. I think in having those special meetings, whether one of you want to do it or you want to ask me or another staff member to give an education as we have those hearings, but we're talking about real issues, and you know, it's not some amorphous. It goes back to very simple thing, and this isn't meant to oversimplify. Charter provides for a class and pay system. We met that. And now it has to be paid for. If you want to maintain Pine Lake as it has existed, but I think this council has also gotten a head start because you've been having community conversations. We've got a survey going on. We've been educating all along. And the main questions aren't any easier, even as you have to make these decisions. Do you want to sustain Pine Lake or not? And there are other options. I don't think those are viable options, particularly for the time frame that needs to be addressed. And SB 33, over the long term, will not help. So it will only get worse immediately. But those are deliberations that you all will be having over the next several weeks. Whatever recommendation that I make for May 26 is only tentative.
Thank you. Couple of follow-up points. I just want to make sure I am understanding clearly. You mentioned that if we increase the anticipated revenue, that we are required to have 3 public hearings between now and the time we vote on first. When you say increased revenue, is that in comparison to the rollback?
It's in comparison to what we collected the previous year.
Right.
So even if it's $1 higher, then it will require the 3 hearings because we will be advertising and setting notices. We will be saying this is a notice of a property tax increase with the summation of the numbers.
But if I'm understanding, then by definition, because we had a change in our budget from 2025 to 2026, because we did the salary rectifications, et cetera, we are asking for more revenue than we were a year ago.
Yes. To qualify that is, at the time that the budget was approved, it was prefaced on the fund balance. And so that was the supplemental revenue. At this point, what is likely to be my recommendation is that we replace the fund balance revenue so that we can preserve that and go ahead and make sure that we are structurally balanced. And the property tax digest process for 2026 allows for that. One of the issues, Councilmember Torrent, that I had always been saying, you know, there are pros and cons of the current fiscal year, and having never been in a city, you know, that was on a calendar fiscal year, I kind of saw that as that's an advantage.
Okay. Next question is, I feel like I have read somewhere that one of the aspects of SB 33 is that it might cap what percentage increase there could be in millage for municipalities going forward. So, first, is that correct?
Well, there have been versions of SB 33. In fact, I think it started as a House bill, and we probably have read much more drastic changes because I think it was the legislatures, I shouldn't say the legislatures, but I would say whoever were the sponsors of these bills, and they made it pretty well known to start to phase out property tax. You know, there used to be a property tax millage actually for the state government, and they phased it out. Now they were far less dependent on property tax because they've got all of these other sources, income tax, sales tax, and then all of the hundreds of other revenue sources, fees, and so forth. But for local government, and part of the reason why I included some of the other articles in, property tax for local governments is preeminent. That's how local governments have always existed. You know, starting out as kind of being that progressive tax as opposed to regressive. Well, as things have happened over the years and people of all incomes, you know, are property owners, and as valuations have increased, it's certainly debatable whether property tax at this point is considered progressive or regressive or somewhere in between. So it could very well be, Councilmember Lowers, that there was some piece of legislation that started an actual, whether reduction in the actual millage rate. Now what we're dealing with is the 3% inflationary cap on
That's,
yeah. So that's in SB 33.
So, by extension of my question is, well, we're already grappling with what we have to account for this year. Must we also think about how whatever millage rate we set this year helps or hinders us potentially going forward? If there's a cap of 3% in subsequent years, I don't think this is a great idea, but should we be talking about whether to go higher so that we have an easier ceiling going forward? I'm sorry, I don't like thinking about it either, but I'm throwing that out there for math.
Yeah, and I think strategically cities are thinking that way, and I think the Mayor Pro Tem's research that he shared with Clarkston, I know some of our staff, because I was just talking to Ned today, who had spoken to the Clarkston city manager, former city manager of Pine Lake, and some of their thinking, and if you recall the article that he shared, I mean, I think they've increased theirs like tentatively 40%, and I think that's part of their thinking. But that also would have been when they started noticing, it would have been before the governor had even signed SB 33.
and they did post that 2 weeks ago, I believe, in anticipation of proactively addressing HB 33. And my understanding, HB 33 is tied to the rate of inflation.
Yeah, I've heard two things. I've heard the 3%, and then I've heard inflation. So we'll need to get some
Yeah.
verification on that.
That was the gist of mine.
Based on some information, just and I'll reiterate what I think I've already shared, going to the DMA's policy meeting where it was an economic policy meeting. HB 33 was the main topic of conversation, and whether this version of it survives, because there are numerous lawsuits already pending.
Good point.
The comment is from the leadership of DMA is this is not going away. It will continue to come back in some form of property tax challenge and change. So again, how do we proactively try to think about that? And I think that is what Clarkston was doing. It's already front page on their website for their city announcing that. Most other cities, I don't believe, have yet even announced anything in regards to that yet. But again, the notion of when we do post the millage, that's the max we could go to. And traditionally it is you post that, and then you negotiate and determine where you want to go from there, whether it's that rate or lower.
if I propose 3.5, you all could go higher.
So I'll just, I don't have further questions. I just appreciate the information, and I think I'm intrigued by the possibility of having some sort of educational forum for residents. So I appreciate that offer, because I think, again, every opportunity to help people understand, because I know I've read this and studied it, and I still don't feel like I totally understand it. So someone who's just looking at their property taxes, and then they just hear, you know, my first response is, oh, my taxes are going up. Well, there's a lot more to that. So I think that's something we could talk about and
Yeah,
explore.
And I know we have at least one resident, I don't know if Courtney is still here, there she is, but she has taken advantage of the education, and I was heartened by her comments at the last meeting.
I have
Mr.
another
Mayor?
question. Oh,
I'm sorry, look, can I footnote something real briefly, Mayor Pro Tem?
Please.
So there's two questions from my chair that you need to be aware of that are being discussed as well. One is the fact that this is a revenue bill that came out of Senate Bill 33. The Constitution requires that revenue bills start in the House. So
Yeah.
there is significant conversation about either a GMA-led or a city-led with GMA participation, constitutional challenge to Senate Bill 33. That will likely be decided and filed, if it's filed by June 30, because the bill is expected to take effect on July 1.
Yeah.
To answer Councilmember Lauer's question, there is a greater than language in Senate Bill 33. It's either the CPI for the year before or the 3%, whichever is greater. I'm sorry, whichever is less. So it is at most 3%, but if the consumer price index is less than 3%, it's capped at the CPI.
So I know one of the things that I'm really looking forward to going to the Small Cities Conference in the next 3 days is, my guess is this will be prime hot topic, HB 33 there, and what better place to start getting some more information, not just from GMA, but other cities and what they're exploring, because it's going to hit small cities predominantly versus, you know, a major metropolitan city like Atlanta, Decatur, and the such. So hopefully we will have some good information and good conversations with folks in the next couple days about that.
I have another question, please, for City Manager Hawthorne. Just to be super, super clear, since I've never done this before, in your report, you say that on the 26th of this month, we are going to adopt a tentative rate. And we cannot go higher than that number.
Correct.
So we're not voting on the millage rate, but we are maxing ourselves out on May 26th.
Yes.
And we have to think about that in terms of like future years, we are potentially maxing ourselves out.
Conceivably, yes.
Okay. Just thinking about sticker shock for people in terms of what they're getting in the mail versus what we actually vote on, you know, in June. I just want to be like cognizant of how that could land, and really for all of us to be aware of those conversations and the education and all of that, because it's like intimidating to me to think about kind of putting this. May 26th is very quick, you know, is coming up very soon, and it's before all the hearings, and there is a certain finality to that decision, it sounds like, so,
Yes, from a maximum standpoint.
yeah,
And-
thank
and-
you.
And I think just the education piece in terms of how we word and put out information, that's not saying this is the rate,
Correct.
this is what we're negotiating from.
Correct.
Now, that could be the rate, that's that potential, and everything back to the rollback rate. Is that the way I understand it correctly? So it behooves all of us to really be aware of that and help our residents understand that. Because when it comes out, the first reaction is going to be, oh my God.
Right, where did this come from? You know, so I think giving that context is gonna be really important in the news blasts and all that sort of thing, so.
Absolutely. Any other questions, or are we ready to move on to item number 3? All right. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. Good evening, council. Great discussions on finance so far. Why not keep it going?
You're smiling too much.
Yeah, you're right. It is serious. So yeah, I'm going to cover two topics tonight. They go along pretty well with everything we've been talking about over the past few months. We're going to start with special assessments, which more specifically is going to be stormwater fees, and then we'll move on to tax anticipation notes, what that is and why I think Pine Lake needs one. Starting with stormwater utility fees, what are they? Stormwater fee is an enterprise fund. We essentially have cost around our storm drainage systems, the maintenance, the operations, so think the services, the personnel that service it, the infrastructure, so any repairs, maintenance, and ultimately replacement of that infrastructure, all those costs that are associated with maintaining a stormwater fund. We raise fees so that we can pay for it. It's a different style than a property tax. You know, we're not looking at properties and saying, what is your value of your property? It's not based off of that. Rather, it's a fee that's based off of an estimate of what that property's impact is on that system. The way that most do it and the way that City of Pine Lake does it is it's based off of square footage of what you call impervious surface. You know, think asphalt and sidewalk and driveways and even roofs. Basically, water can't be absorbed. It pushes it into the system so that it can get back into the normal flow. And so we do $100 per equivalent residential unit, and most of the homes or the properties inside of city limits that's a single family property is one unit, so essentially $100 annually is their cost. And so what are common factors to consider in fee adjustments? We've got things like aging infrastructure. We've got inflationary increases in our operating costs. We've got long-term financial stability, and we've got capital improvement planning. Those are just to name some of the more important ones. I'm going to focus on the inflationary increases in operating costs as well as long-term financial stability. I think the aging infrastructure and the capital improvement planning is something that probably come from Mr. Kendrick, given his knowledge of those systems. So I started with just kind of a research on my own as to like when is the last time we changed this fee. And I could go back as far as 2018 on the tax commissioner's website, and it was still $100 at that time. So it was 8 years ago. So that was, in 2018, we had $65,000 in revenue, and in 2018, the expenditures were $37,545. So that gives you an increase in your net position. Essentially, you had more money coming in than you had going out of $28,136. Again, that was in 2018. 2026 budget revenue is exactly the same. It was slightly different, but basically the properties haven't changed that much, and if the fee's the same, obviously your revenue's not going to change that much. But the budget expenditures is $82,127. So that would be a budget decrease in net position of $16,500. So essentially, we're now spending more than we're bringing in. That's a 120% increase in cost with no change in revenues, and most of that was coming from personnel services for public works. And I think, and we can have Stanley speak on this, but I believe it's just it's sort of an adjustment as to public works and how they spend their time. So it's a more appropriate, a more accurate allocation of what they're working on, as opposed to it going into the general fund. Actually, they're doing more work towards stormwater. Does that sound correct, Stanley? I guess I want to.
Theoretically, that is correct. So even as Stephen is making this presentation, and I've spoken to the council before, we've had centralized budgeting where departments haven't necessarily had a chance to give their input on actual cost as the budget is being prepared, and that was the case for 2026 as well. So while we have budgeted numbers, what I've asked Mr. Kendrick to do is to tell us what he and his staff, as well as other related costs of stormwater, So even though Stephen has shared those numbers with you, they could change because Mr. Kendrick hasn't had a chance to really tell us what's happening in the field and from day to day. But yes, theoretically, what he said is true.
Thank you, Stan. Appreciate that. I guess the main point then would be is to, figuring out what that allocation should be, having a good estimate on your expenditures so you know how much funds to bring in. Because it is important if you're going to have an enterprise fund and you're going to run it that way. Essentially, if you're not paying for it through the fees, you're going to have to subsidize it elsewhere, which usually comes from the general fund, which, given the conversation that we've been having, is not the direction we want to go in. So we'll just keep all that in mind. So what's the process for stormwater fee adjustments? It will require formal action through resolution from City Council, and it's going to be included in an updated fee schedule if it gets approved. Council's consideration and public comments on this rate change are going to align with the public hearings coming up at the millage rate. So I guess more to come on that next month. All right, moving on to tax anticipation notes. What are they? Oh, please.
Yeah, I think we have some. So let's start with Councilmember Lowers.
Do you have a rate in mind?
Well, I did do a calculation based off of the budget, and if you were to increase it $23 per equivalent residential unit, you would basically be even.
Other questions?
No, that was a good question.
I have a, oh, go ahead. No. Okay. I have a couple. Is this a rate that we could change like year to year? Like it's not something super complicated to?
Correct. You can change
Update.
this annually.
Okay.
And thanks for saying that. That was something I was going to bring up is something to consider is we know that we have inflationary costs on an annual basis. And so it's not uncommon to see some places that do a more regular inflationary update to their fees. So it is an option that way when you haven't touched it in 8 years and you're going to see a 40% increase. Instead, you saw 3% increase or 5% increase.
Right, like over
year.
each
So-
budget.
So yes,
Yeah.
to answer your question, you can absolutely do that.
Okay, so that's something we could just try to factor in if we wanted to make it more incremental as opposed to the big jump.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then I would imagine the ideal scenario is you just like perfectly estimate it and exactly the amount comes in that you want to spend. But if there is overage, are there any restrictions as to what happens with that money? Like what? Because you mentioned.
So if you bring in more than
Yeah, like when your first example, I feel like was about having more come in 2 years ago, 1 year ago.
For many years, it kind of switched as, you kept your rates the same. I mean, eventually it turned around maybe in 2021 or 2022. So for a long time, you were actually pretty well funded.
And where does that extra?
This is not a general fund item, it is a special fund item, which means
Right.
the fees stay in that fund and can be only used for that purpose.
And do they roll over
Yes.
year to year? Okay.
Enterprise funds can subsidize
Well,
general fund.
my understanding of my application of the statute for
Okay.
stormwater funds is that they can only be used for the purposes for which the funds were raised.
Mm-hmm.
I could talk with the finance director and get that clarified between
No,
us later.
No, I
But-
think that's true. I don't know if Stephen misheard you, but yes, those should stay within the stormwater fund. And it's kind of analogous to the general fund, which can be
Right.
used for a lot of different general purposes. But from an accounting standpoint, it would remain in the fund, and then for future budgets, you could use those funds for maybe a significant project that needs to
Like a
happen.
capital project kind of accumulation.
Yes.
Okay. And then I think my last question is just, is that stuff, or is this stormwater fund money spent kind of internally? I don't know how to describe this. Like, is it money that Public Works is using, or is it stuff that we are occasionally contracting out, you know, like hiring outside labor for bigger projects or anything like that?
Yeah, what's the actual cost inside the fund? It's a combination of the two. I couldn't speak on the specific contractor that we use, but I know from a regulatory and compliance standpoint, we have somebody come in that needs to evaluate the stormwater system.
Yeah, so as an example, and to your point in question, when Mr. Kendrick was originally not hired but contracted for, it was a contractual relationship. But a portion of his contract, then as a contractor, was paid out of stormwater.
Okay, thank you, that's really helpful, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephen. My one question is maybe not so much about our stormwater fee, but the fees we collect from the county for stormwater. And I'm not sure who would respond to that, because I know we get a certain amount from the county because we are taking in stormwater from outside of the city limits.
I've heard this from Bernard as well, and I don't see that revenue coming in, so I'm not sure what anyone's talking.
So if it's not coming in, we're obviously not getting enough.
I'm
And
not familiar with that. I've never, maybe that's common for, I mean, Bernard would probably be the better one to answer that question, whether it's common for counties, or maybe I should have an answer. I don't know. I've just never seen it. I'm not aware of, it's certainly not coming into Pine Lake. I know that we assess our own fees for our own storm water, and we bring those in. But I do think Bernard's, I've heard his argument for it, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm just not aware of an actual agreement with the county, and I certainly don't see those funds coming in. So
because I know
maybe something to
every time we get a
investigate further.
storm, you just look at the streets and you see the water flowing from outside of Pine Lake into Pine Lake. So
Right.
Yeah, it's an example of, if you're raising the question, because I'm not familiar with what the answer should be either, that comprehensive revenue study, it would allow us to look at those kind of issues.
okay, thanks.
Oh, I have one other question, sorry, so many tonight.
Don't apologize.
Is this in the strategic performance report, City Clerk Dagenhardt's portion is about looking over the fees, and so is this one of the things that's going to be in that, looking at the fee schedule, the stormwater?
Actually covered in Stephen's part under special assessment.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood what I was
Yeah,
doing.
and so one of the reasons why Stephen and I broke out special assessment is because we're going to be making a recommendation this year, whereas all of the other fees, we're not prepared to make a recommendation. I want to do that as soon as possible with the 2027 budget, but one of the reasons, it just gives me a chance to revisit the fund balance issue and why restoring fund balance from what was approved for the current budget is for some of these special projects that we really need to do. Our fund balance is already committed.
Right.
And so before I can bring that to you, I need to be able to say we've got some fund balance, a one-time funding source to move ahead with the project that could be a net plus in bringing in revenues potentially.
Thank you.
Moving on.
Moving on.
Tax anticipation notes, commonly referred to as a TAN. What is it? It's a short-term financing instrument used by local governments in Georgia to kind of answer for their cash flow issues. It's very common for Pine Lake is a perfect example where property taxes are generated sort of at it's seasonal. It's towards the end of the year. And then you have the whole fiscal year where you have expenditures going out each and every month. So that's what it is. It is very common. And so what's the money used for? It's for your operations. I mean, it's covering your payroll. It's covering all the different contractors that you have. It's the money that needs to go out every single month that you haven't quite collected because it just hasn't happened yet. And so what's the issuance process? We'll do a cash flow analysis. We'll do some revenue forecasting, which will help us determine what our short-term borrowing needs actually are. And then it comes to council. We'll bring it to you guys. And I'm anticipating this to be at the regular May meeting. But you'll get to look at what the terms are, how much we think we need to borrow, what those interest rates are, what those different issuance costs might be. I still need to get with City Attorney Chris to talk about whether we want to use a financial advisor to help do it, whether we need some bond counsel, or whether he can review it himself. But there will be some administrative costs that come with it in addition to interest expense as well. And all this comes about because of cash flow and borrowing needs. So 76% of our budget, general fund revenue budget, is collected in the final 4 months of the fiscal year. These revenues are property taxes, sanitation fees / plot tax, and the insurance premium tax. This leaves only 24% of general fund revenue to cover the remainder of the year. So you can see why you basically have a huge influx in cash at one point of the year, and then you basically have very little while all your expenditures are coming in here. And so you can just see these issues with cash flow. I did give some numbers in the SPR. I don't think I'm going to go through them tonight, but basically you can avoid having to do a TAN as long as you bring in sufficient revenue. So if it's all coming in at the end of the year and you're anticipating cash flow for that next fiscal year, the idea is to bring it in to cover those months, right? Again, it's common that it doesn't always happen that way, but since we've been budgeting for deficits and we're actually experiencing real deficits, it doesn't seem to be just a budgeting issue. Eventually you just kind of run out of fund balance. You no longer have cash to carry you through. And I think that's what Pine Lake is experiencing now, why you need a TAN to begin with. So
I would like to add to what Stephen has said in case the question has occurred to you, why this year as opposed, say, to last year. I think historically Pine Lake has used TANs, but I think it's been several years. Last year, last summer, I opted to, because we had the same issue, and basically we thought that we could handle it administratively, and so we essentially told staff to stop spending except for really essential things until our revenue sources started to come in. And so we made it, but just barely. This year, and it goes back to the increase in payroll. Almost look at that alone. That was approved by and effective the last pay period or first pay period in December. And that's like $130,000 differential just in salaries alone. So if we were already tight last year, and the property tax that was approved last year wouldn't have accounted for it. So the projected property tax adjustment using the 3 mills, I think I told you, is somewhere around $150,000. If we had received that $150,000 last year, would have gone a long way. But we certainly will need it for the future, where our budget stands currently.
Questions? We'll start with Councilmember Kohler.
I'm good right now.
All right, thank you, sir.
Sure.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, do we need a 2-second stretch break since we've been sitting here for almost 2 hours? Feel free. Moving on to item number 4, conversation about an anti-smoking ordinance. Councilmember Lowers, this is you.
All right. So I was approached by a representative from the American Heart Association, who just look for the people with the most public health association in any given elected body. They are working with different municipalities and counties in Georgia to update anti-smoking ordinances. To my surprise, we don't have one ourselves. There are certain places around that there are reference on our website to, not smoking in public, like at the beach and so on. And we're covered by Georgia's general anti-smoking statutes as well. What I was presented with is something that is more comprehensive. In addition to things that the state covers, like banning smoking in areas like businesses, retail establishments, public buildings, public spaces like parks. We could in theory go further into any outdoor spaces, any outdoor places of employment, so presumably like next to a food truck, something like that. It's a little more comprehensive than some other ordinances around us, like Atlanta's, in that it explicitly excludes not only cigarettes, cigars, and pipes, but also vaping, and also is inclusive of not just tobacco, but marijuana products. So, the reasons for this are strictly health related. Secondhand smoke is a major driver of morbidity and mortality, and it's a chance to protect our employees and our residents and our guests. So I'm putting it out there as a thing that feels very on brand for Pine Lake and a way to shore up our city code, to sort of get where the current thinking on public health is. So I wanted to bring it up today for discussion. I have language that we could use, and my understanding is we can go beyond simply what's covered in Georgia law and, embellish it ourselves. So that's my opening volley.
Questions?
How do you see the administration and enforcement of this looking?
That's the big question, I think, is it a symbolic thing for us, or is it something that we would actually ask for enforcement for? I'm reluctant to have that be a thing. However, there are some provisions, like we could go so far as to ban smoking in like hallways and public areas of multi-residence buildings or hotels, motels. I'm not sure if that includes Airbnbs. But those would give people who objected to smoking the grounds to, have a complaint, have a fine issued. So there's potential there, but I am very conscious of not wanting to create another unfundable mandate.
Other questions?
I have some. Mostly around vaping, just because from my standpoint, like I'm not a vapor, but my perspective is it's a very socially acceptable thing. And if it's not currently covered in the Georgia statutes, right, is what you're saying?
It does. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
Well, I'm asking, but Jane, what did you,
it's not.
that's what you said, right?
Sorry.
Yeah, no,
I've seen alternate things. It's not explicitly stated, but I think it's implied, Chris?
What the code says is that tobacco products includes the definition as established by federal law in 2023. So there's an incorporation of the federal statute, and the federal statute does not include vaping because vaping wasn't a thing. Well, let me back up. It's 2003, not 23, excuse me. But vaping was not a thing in 2003, so it is not expressly included. So the question becomes, is vaping an open area of legislation for local governments because it's not expressly handled by the state statute? Most of the other areas that you're talking about are not expressly granted to cities and counties to regulate independently of the state statute. And that creates, for me, preemption issues because three ways that you can be preempted. You can either be directly, your ordinance directly conflicts with what the state says. The state has basically taken the field of area and said, we regulate all of this, we're comprehensive, we've done all the things that we think need to be done, nobody else can do anything more than we do. And then there's a third indirect piece, which is they don't expressly say you can't do this, but they've sort of intimated that this is limited. And the case that gets that point best illustrated is Sturm Kruger versus Atlanta, which is a firearms damages claim brought by the city of Atlanta against Sturm Kruger for and other manufacturers of firearms, claiming damages to the public as calling firearms a public nuisance. And the Supreme Court of Georgia ultimately said that there are claims granted expressly to cities for warranty and breach of contract related to firearms that they purchased. And by including those two types of claims, they did not authorize any other types of claims to be brought by cities against firearms manufacturers. So that's the implied preemption example that's the cleanest to describe how that one works. So I don't know what other cities and counties are involved or who the Heart Association has reached out to. But state preemption is something we deal with regularly in my world because it seems like every year we're being told by the legislature we can't do something we did last year. Sandy Springs had that happen to them with a restriction on timber construction only above 3 stories. And if your building was 4 stories or more, you had to have steel in the first 3 cities or the first 3 stories. The legislature came back the next year and said, no, you can't do that. There was an effort a few years ago to change how false alarms were adjudicated. In most cities, false alarms were issued citations against the homeowner. And since it's not their fault that their alarm went off incorrectly, other cities have tried to impose sanctions on the alarm companies who are basically using a public service to sell their service that they didn't have no responsibility for when it failed. So there was an effort to just preempt those entirely and say you cannot regulate the alarm service industry at all. It got watered down substantially to where you could regulate it, but only in a narrow field. So that's the course of about 4 years worth of what the legislature keeps doing to cities when they try to overstep where the legislature thinks we belong in our lane. So I'm not meaning to be the negative Nelly in the room, but the fundamental question I would have is what is left from the state statute that the Heart Association thinks can be regulated, and why do they think preemption doesn't apply? Because I don't have answers to either of those two questions. I don't know how we would defend a claim from somebody who said our ordinance was preempted by the state. So those are my concerns. You're obviously free to ignore me and do whatever the policy body decides, but I fully believe that there's a very real chance that somebody would be able to overturn such an ordinance.
Thank you.
Good points to be aware of, so thank you.
So going back to my vaping point, I think that for me, I would really want to, be able, I would like to see if we're going to move forward with this, like a lot of research into like, what are the apartment, are they vaping in the stairwells? Are there businesses like Silver's, like they have a nighttime dinner thing with kind of a patio. Like, I don't know if people are vaping there. I don't know what anybody does because I don't pay attention to that kind of stuff so much in my direct personal life. But I just want to be really aware of that before we impose something, because again, to your point of like a mandate that's not enforced doesn't seem like a good idea. And so, I'm open to it. I agree with you that it's a very like Pine Lake thing to do. But also just being really sure from my standpoint of the legal pieces that City Attorney Balch has brought up, but also just what is sort of culturally done here for me is a blank. So I want to be aware of that.
I mean, we could take that same argument back 20 20, 30 years, and, you know, smoking was the norm in clubs and bars around the country, and now it's not. So I'm less compelled by the norm now because we can set the norm. We can be a super healthy city. But there's a lot of things here that obviously need to be massaged both locally and at a state level. But I'm interested, again, I brought it up because I'm interested in whether or not it fits.
And just for clarification, you said including any outdoor spaces? We're not talking about people's backyards,
No,
right?
not
Okay.
talking about private property. We're talking about property that is either a place of business or grounds that are owned by and maintained by the city.
And then presumably that would affect things like events that we have, right?
Right.
So if this would apply to like anything at like Lake Fest, Pride, all that kind of thing, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments?
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 5, the scheduling for Summer Town Hall. I am just going to throw out the notion that I would like us to look at calendars. Doesn't necessarily have to be right now, to schedule a town hall, hopefully in the next 2 months. And so look at your calendars. I think we can do that out of pocket here, with dates.
At what point will our dates for hearings that we know we have to have for budget be held? Because that should be taken into account.
Absolutely.
It will be during the months of, primarily the month of June.
And we'll know those dates by the end of May, or when do
You'll
we
be
decide?
you'll be approving them.
Okay,
We'll propose some dates.
you're gonna propose them.
Right,
Okay.
but then you'll discuss, based on, any potential conflicts, but we do have to meet, the legislative requirements, different times, spacing of the meetings, and, so that's why we need to make recommendations to you, and so if some of those dates don't work out, we'll have to see if they meet the test.
Thank you. All right. We will take all that into consideration. And Chris, number 6 is a update on the DeKalb Soil and Water Conservation Commission.
So I have been working with the Public Works Director to try to get some traction with the District Director's office. I've also reached out to the Law Department to try to get their understanding of what we need to do, if anything, with respect to an MOU with this with the county related to soil and water conservation. Because my understanding is we have a certificate of authority from EPD, which is all we're supposed to have. So arguably that means we have a MOU with the county that goes back decades and nobody knows where it is and nobody has it on file. But EPD says we are perfectly legitimate with how we're regulating stormwater and our projects. I have not gotten any traction or any information or responses back from the Soil and Water Conservation District or from the Law Department about how they want us to proceed in having this conversation. So we are sort of stuck at this point. The person who emailed y'all used a personal email address, so we don't even have confirmation that they are who they say they are. So it's a little challenging to get traction on something where we don't have all of the information and can't get people to respond to our queries.
Okay. Questions, comments?
Could we invite them to just come and speak at council if the issue is one of like quorum?
I don't know what they want to talk to us about, and I don't know whether that needs to be staffed before they speak to the policy body or not. I would rather not have an outside agency over which we don't have any control try to give legal advice to my elected body. That's all kinds of wrong in my world. So I would prefer that not happen. But that's your lawyer talking, not a policy body member talking. So if that's something that the council wants, to invite the Soil and Water Conservation District to come address you, that's your prerogative to invite them. But what this person did of inviting you to violate the Open Meetings Act by this private meeting with the entire council and all of staff is just so completely and wholly inappropriate that I don't think they know what they're doing. So the concept of the conversation is not bad. How they suggested it and proposed it violates the absolute letter of the Open Meetings Act, and it's just wrong.
I wouldn't expect them to know about quorum laws and open meetings.
They have to,
So-
they're a state agency, they're bound by them just like we are.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, Councilmember Torrent, but the idea that a state agency or a county agency doesn't understand the rules by which public bodies do policy is absurd to me.
All right. Any other questions or comments for discussion? All right, let's move on to number 7. Councilmember Lowers, you wanted to address this.
Did I? Right, one of the things that is, potentially an existential threat to Pine Lake's existence is the plans of our neighbors to annex closer to us. Every action they take toward us limits how Pine Lake could change its own borders in the future, and we refer to as boxing in. So, whether or not annexation is a thing that our city wants to take on this year or next year, it behooves us to know how the rest of the county is moving. And I'm interested in the best ways that we can keep abreast of what Clarkston and Stone Mountain in particular, that, maybe Avondale or others are considering. If there's less good, solid neighborhoods up for the taking around us, then our options are fewer. So how can we best understand what's going on in the county?
So, and I think one of the points that you made early on in your, I'm not sure if it was pre-inauguration or shortly after, but I know that you had sent an email to me requesting clarification on, was the movement of more annexation, was that county driven, and it actually helped me to clarify. In retrospect, I think it was probably more DeKalb Municipal Association driven, and kind of putting 2 and 2 together. The president of the DeKalb Municipal Association is the mayor of Clarkston, and they are one of the cities that are pretty aggressive moving it ahead. So I hadn't attended some of those earlier meetings before I attended, I think, along with Mayor Pro Tem Goldberg and Councilmember Torrent. It was being heavily pushed to get some maps of cities that were interested. To my knowledge, the issue probably isn't those cities, even though I believe Clarkston is probably looking pretty expansive, but I think it's probably on the other side of Memorial from Pine Lake. The other cities, I don't have the impression their encroachment would be surrounding Pine Lake. But I think in the past, and Mayor Pro Tem Goldberg, because I know I asked him this question, and it's probably more familiar, I think where that effort has come historically that might have been a threat based on your description to Pine Lake being surrounded was not from existing cities, but new cities that we're looking at forming. I'll give you an example. When I was in Fulton County, and it had already taken place, but the city of South Fulton was a new city that took up, you know, much of Fulton County in the south. And Mayor Pro Tem, I've forgotten the name of the new city that you told me. I know it started Greenhaven.
Greenhaven.
Now that was some years ago, and I'm not aware, but that doesn't mean very much, of some current momentum for, and I can't even tell you why it failed going back those few years ago. But it seems not to have been a topic on the DeKalb Municipal Association's agenda, and I have reached out, including back when you questioned, you know, give me some background, you know, what's the overall plan, and I just wasn't able to get a response from a staff perspective. I did my own research that I shared with you in the last SPR on Clarkston, which would be the nearest community to us that I know is pretty aggressively looking at it, and they're just in the study process, 20-week study process.
So, speaking purely for myself, I've heard everything from Stone Mountain and Clarkston are going all in to Madam CEO is asking every city to draw up its wish list to there's going to be a request to the legislature in January 2027, and that's when DeKalb is going to get divided up, to nothing's really happening. To Melanie Hammett's point earlier, we can't afford not to know what's actually going on. And again, my question is, how can we get a better understanding as a city administration and governance body?
There's two avenues of information. One is the DeKalb Municipal Association. That's the easiest one. The other easy one is for the five of you to divvy up the cities in DeKalb and call the mayors or council members in those cities and just say, what are you doing? Is DeKalb moving towards full municipalization like Fulton did? Is the county getting out of the business of running its own dirt? Y'all can have that conversation elected to elected much easier than I can with city attorneys or the city manager can with other city managers. So that's the cleanest and fastest way, is those two avenues, both of which are completely political.
Thank you.
I'm in favor of that avenue. If that's what it takes, I think that we can divvy up
All right.
and figure that out.
Yeah, I agree.
Tomorrow we'll divvy.
Tomorrow we divvy.
It must be Thursday, Wednesday. Wednesday, we divvy. Okay. Thank you. Next on the item is compare contrast with neighboring jurisdictions, looking at fee schedule. I think we've already kind of informally started that within ourselves. Is there anything else you would add, Jane, Councilmember Lowers, to that?
No, I mean, I understand that there are sort of layers to this. There's not just what's literally on the fee schedule, but what is implied in how each city defines what's covered by a fee. I think that's what Devin's referring to in the SPR. Not, okay. Again, I think that's something that we are happy to take on and look at, to get started. I understand the potential value of having a full formal consultant-led assessment, but when we're already talking about raising the millage this month just to keep the lights on, I can't imagine how we do that.
Agreed.
I agree. Now's not the time.
When you say fine fee schedule, you just speaking in terms of administrative, or you speaking in terms of like citations and court fining fees as well?
Pretty much everything, honestly.
Well, the fine, the standard fines are assessed by the judges, and that's done by special order, standing order of the chief judge, on an annual basis. And they're usually not deviated very much from city to city, but there is the ability of the municipal court to set those. That is not a legislative function, that's a judicial function. So the fees would be things like application fees, special permit fees, business licenses. Your current code is a per employee assessment for business licenses. Other cities like Decatur, Brookhaven, Dunwoody, and Doraville are a percentage of revenues and head counts. So there's both fees involved. All of those cities also have flat fees for certain regulated professions like chiropractors, lawyers, doctors, people who have to have a license from some other regulating agency. Those are typically capped at $400 per professional. People who are hourly, like paralegals and secretaries, are not included in that, and they're not required to have their own business license. It's just the professional who's overseeing the work of the office. What else? So that's the biggest ones. If you wanted to do an impact fee, which would be a fee attached to the development of property, that would be that's a special process to go through and assess an impact fee, and then those fees have to be legislatively defined about how they get used, not unlike stormwater fees. There's a whole host of available fees that are not currently imposed, as I understand Pine Lake's code, but are available if you wanted to start trying to implement more of those. If you wanted to explore that opportunity, we can have that conversation another day.
And just as for me, when I was thinking about this, I was not thinking about fines coming from the PD and the courts. It was more the fee structure that the city administers. But I also think we need to keep in mind the balance of, yes, it's an easy thing to say, oh, we're not charging for that, let's go ahead and do that, that's free money. But then what impact does that also have? So I think we need to look at it very holistically. We want to entice people to open up businesses here, so do we add more business fees? Does that entice them or slow it down? So I think the idea of just one is just, and we've talked about that through our emails, just educating ourselves and doing some research on that. And I think we have resources, both Chris and Ned and Stanley, to gather more data from.
I think for me, the only thing that kind of comes to mind about doing a study or not, because City Clerk Degenhard, in your portion of the report, you talk about possibly doing that. And I think I would be curious to know like an estimate for a study like that, simply because if the idea is that the return for the city could be really big, I think it's worth considering. Like, I would just like to know more information. And I also feel like fees, you know, you experts correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that also is going to affect a lot of commercial development, you know, thinking about gentrification, thinking about who's coming in, that some of these fees are going to potentially incentivize certain kinds of businesses to be here, or, you know, how we are splitting that up and also getting revenue for the city. So I feel like kind of bigger picture, you know, it isn't my top priority in the moment thinking about the millage, but I think bigger picture, it's something I feel like is worth, you know, returning to.
All right, thank you. And item number 9, which is looking at a proposed amendment to Chapter 2, Article 2, Division 2, lots of 2s of the Code of Ordinances regarding City Council meeting start time. I think there was a number of comments made about shifting the time to 6:30. It was brought up potentially doing that as a trial basis. So, Councilmember Torrent, that was something you wanted to bring up.
A number of people have mentioned that if we change it to 6:30, they could better attend. We've had a number of guests or people that we were having awards for. The judge has had to fight traffic. I know, like, sometimes, you know, it's really rough for me to get here, and I know that people that work, you know, have to get in as well. So I think 6:30 is a reasonable time. Just to give a bit of context. East Point is at 6:30, Clarkston is at 7, Stone Mountain is at 6:30, Tucker's at 7, Brookhaven is at 6:30, Decatur's at 7:30, College Park is 7:30. So I think it's not going to be bizarre or unique to us. And I think 6:30 is just going to allow for more participation. I think it is what we should at least try.
Questions, comments?
On College Park, having previously been the city manager there, while their meetings start at 7:30, it's preceded by a work session that starts at 6. And you know, as I've thought about this, there is nothing that precludes the public from coming within a window. I mean, if they can't be here at 6, they can be here at 6:30. If the issue is public comments, I mean, obviously we have 2 public comments, but you could also change public comments to whenever you want, to make sure that more of the public has a chance to be here. I was quizzing Mr. Dagenhart earlier today because he was here during the period when it was at 7 before the council changed, I guess, maybe a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. So as you think about a trial, I mean, what are your measurements? When I quizzed him, I asked, you know, have you seen any difference? And, you know, it didn't take him but a second to answer no. I think you also need to consider, you know, if you start it later, then we're going to get to topics later. And my observation is you've lost, you know, more than half of your audience even at this period. Another concept that maybe and I think the city attorney needs to probably weigh in on a question that I think Mayor Pro Tem Goldberg had asked. If you go to a trial, does that require an actual change in the ordinance? If it does or if it doesn't, another informal way of looking at it, and this was just something that occurred to me a couple nights ago. We've got an executive session this evening, and we usually do executive sessions at the end. But you could, because I think you'll be having more executive sessions, particularly with the city manager recruitment, maybe that would be a way of, you know, doing regular updates as a test, as a trial, but maybe you schedule those from 6 to 6:30, and those aren't open to the public either. So just some food for thought.
Oh, go ahead.
Questions?
I think it's, you know, I think trying to have a lot of participation is ideal. And I also think about, you know, this sort of decision doesn't impact everybody equally, in terms of like staff coming in the next morning and that kind of thing. But, you know, I wasn't clear before tonight whether the proposal was 7 or 6:30. But I feel like for 6:30, I had the same kind of thought as City Manager Hawthorne. I think that for people to just come late, like, I don't think that that's super disruptive, and especially given that some of the really important business is often, I don't know how much we're allowed to change this or not, because I don't make the agendas, but, you know, looking at tonight's agenda, the strategic performance report is near the end. It tends to be near the end of work sessions. So if we're starting later, then there's even less likelihood, I think, of people being here for a later portion. So I also think another thing to consider maybe is like, I don't know how much we're allowed to schedule things differently, if putting the reports and other business in a different place. or things like when we have guests, thinking about traffic, you know, if it's a matter of putting them later in the agenda so there's some buffer. But yeah, I just think that there are a lot of things to consider, and for half an hour, I don't think it's so significant to warrant that, especially with the executive session suggestion, so. That's where I'm at.
Mr. Balch, to make a change to that ordinance? What would we need to do?
Based on what your charter says, you would need to have a first read on May 26th and then a second read at the end of June to make the change, and then it would be effective for your meetings in July. Your city manager and I tend to be strict constructionists when it comes to your charter, so I'm not comfortable recommending a deviation from what your charter says about amending the ordinance. You could have an ordinance that said, we're making this change to the regular meeting and to section 2-72 to 6:30 for the meetings in July through January. That's 6 months. And then that ordinance that you pass that makes that change would expire unless you make a change at the end of January that says, we're now making this change permanent. So that's one mechanism by which that would get done. The other thing to consider is if what you're looking for is more participation on business items and people's opportunities to speak to business items and not just generally address the council on matters of public concern, then you could add a requirement that for any ordinance you have a public comment as part of that ordinance item on your agenda, or you could extend that also to certain kinds of resolutions. So you could define the avenues where there would be other opportunities later in the agenda for public comment that are not necessarily just the two big areas at the beginning and the end. There's a number of jurisdictions in the county where that's the case, where that's the usual practice. It tends not to belabor or delay a meeting very often. There's occasionally considerations of charter changes, for instance, that may be debated that generate a lot of heat or a lot of consternation. But there's often not a lot of opposition or concern or angst about most of the business of the council. So if you wanted to add that, that's another way of offering public participation without changing your meeting time. Your agendas this year have been longer than they have been in the year and a half I've been here, so you tend to run longer meetings. If you extend the start time to 6:30, you're talking about extending your end time by half an hour as well. And your work sessions have been going till around 9:30 on average this year. That's looking at 10 o'clock after that. So I'm not saying it's a good idea, bad idea, or indifferent. I'm not offering, and I'm obviously speaking further than your question, Councilmember Torin, and I apologize for that. But there are other ways to address this concern if you elect to undertake those other choices. And I would not ordinarily articulate all of this in a public meeting, except nobody's asked me these questions before. So if you want my advice to be confidential, it's best to ask me by email or privately or by telephone rather than having a question that I need to respond to in public.
And, Mayor Pro Tem, could I just echo, maybe even endorse Chris at least bringing up the point. A lot of governing bodies, they do for different items throughout the agenda, open it up for public comments, and it has worked from what I have seen, and could actually inspire people to stick around longer if they know that they're going to have a chance to speak. And it might be even an opportunity. I'm not saying that this would be the case, but as we often hear that in the first public comments and the second it's kind of a listening session, they're speaking to an actual item. it's probably an answer that you would want addressed, before you would take action. So I think I really like that. I hadn't thought about it, but I have seen that used.
So I would chime in saying that being the nuance that Pine Lake is a city of creative thinkers, that we maybe look at creatively researching other ways to manage the timing of things on our agenda versus at least initially as a way to, not saying we're not going to change the time, but what are some other creative ways that we could figure this out? Because I think it can be done where we are getting people a chance to come in, and we do business before, an executive session 6 to 6:30 or other scheduling things. So I'm going to suggest that's something we look at and investigate how other municipalities do their scheduling.
So, Mayor Pro Tem, if I can ask, do you want an agenda item for the 26th or not at this point?
I would propose we don't, but that is up for consensus here.
So in the last 5 weeks, I've heard from 3 different people that it's hard for them to make it to these meetings when they're at 6 o'clock. And they used to be at 7, and I don't think it's necessarily that changing the start time, you'll get more participation. There's not a lot of people here, but it's on certain topics that people are interested in. And I know when the time changed from 7 to 6, I did not come as often because it's right when I'm getting home. And then once it's already started, I'm like, I'll just stay at home. So
If I,
30 minutes doesn't, sorry.
no, you continue.
Oh, to me, 30 minutes can make a difference, but it's not that much of a time. It's not like it's starting at 7 to me. I feel like it's a good middle ground. And
If just as a point of reference, and I think that Kathy Denaberger can echo, in my opinion, I would be curious as to, like the attorney said and the city manager said, like, what is the goal? Because I think that right now we have so many more options, from the blast to the online presence, to the open discussions that you guys are going to great lengths to be inclusive and make sure that it's available. I would almost be curious as to, like, these 3 individuals, were they coming to meetings previously? Because I don't remember seeing a lot of people. Do you remember seeing a lot of people, Kathy, at our meetings? Not never. But just maybe we could even consider first, like the attorney and the city manager recommended, that maybe placement of these public comments, because even when we do get a nice crowd, once folks voice their opinions, we lose the crowd after that. So it'll give them the opportunity to be present and participate and say what they have to say and still be home in time for dinner. So maybe just that can be taken into consideration.
Mr. Brooks, could you clarify? I got mixed up when you're saying to change so that we have public comment after like specific ordinance change. Would we need to do an ordinance change to do
That would
that?
be simply changing your rules of procedure. That's a resolution.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I can
Then-
see the wheels spinning, Councilmember Flowers.
Yeah.
So many options. I would be interested in doing a 6-month trial of modifying it to do executive session at 6 and move into regular session at 6:30, which would accomplish not having an overall later run time for those of us who have to be here throughout, and giving the public a little extra time to get here. I also think we could do more to let people know that they can send their comments to us and have it read if that's, I mean, we've all done that on somebody's behalf if they ask us to. There are other ways to get their comments in the record. But I would be interested in trying that modification for 6 months and just seeing what happens. So I guess what I would ask for would be that we do consider it and do at least have a formal vote on it as opposed to kind of our eyeballing and shrugging that we're doing now.
I agree.
So if we were to want to change the order of items on the agenda, we just would need a resolution. Is that correct?
If you were going to formally alter the business items on the agenda, you would need an ordinance to change 2-73. If you're going to simply add an executive session, which is a permissible piece either at the beginning or the end of your meeting, that does not require, I would recommend that you do a resolution just so it's clear to the public what you're doing. The challenge you're going to face is we don't need an executive session every meeting. So if you have the executive session on there as the first item on the agenda and there's not a need for one, then you're going to still start your business meeting at 6. Whether that changed your analysis or not about how you want to proceed is I don't know the answer to that. But when I got here in January of last year as your city attorney, you did not have executive session as a regular item on your agenda. That was a request I made so that we had that option in case I needed to speak with the council on something. So in most of those meetings, excuse me, for the last 16 months, we have not had executive session. We've had more executive sessions in this term of the council than we had all of last year combined. So your history says that will not necessarily create the gap that you're looking for.
My other thought about the executive session situation is when we do need it, we might need more than half an hour. So our conversation kind of be abruptly cut off and then we return to it later. So for me, I really appreciate knowing the options and understanding the process a little better. And I think my preference is adding more options for public comment and seeing how that goes, because it sounds like it's not as big of a change overall in terms of like scheduling and publicizing it. And then who knows where it would go.
So I would be in favor that we do a little more research in terms of how other communities are doing, whether it's scheduling more public comment after more new business items, how that process is, because I don't feel like I have enough information to see how we could address that before I'm willing to make a change at the start time. I want more data. So that's my proposal.
So I'm sorry, I keep asking you clarifying questions, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, but do you want my office to get you that data about how other cities are running their meetings with respect to public comment? Do you want ask the city manager to have staff do that research, or is the council going to do the research on its own?
I would think that we could do that as a council.
I agree.
If we're willing to do that.
Okay, so we're going to hold the agenda item for the I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak.
We're going to
over you.
divvy that up tomorrow.
We're going to do it tomorrow.
Fair. So we're going to hold the agenda item for May. We may revisit, do we need to revisit it as another work session item for June then?
I would say that's a reasonable time frame. You all?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Good question. Thank you.
May I just ask, as you divvy up the research, make sure that you include work sessions, because we do work sessions and meetings one way, other cities do it different, but usually they hold both, whether on the same night or split.
Thank you. All right. For those public who have stayed, we appreciate that, and this is your chance to add some public comment.
Courtney Courtney Wasserberger, 470 Pine Drive. So first of all, thank you, Mr. Torrent and Mr. Goldberg, for going to a conference. I think ongoing education is really important, and I'm hoping you guys get your creative juices flowing and find some really scrappy solutions for some of the challenges that we have. The only thing I just wanted to note was that while I really enjoy things like the strategic report and coming to these meetings, I know that I, according to my friends, am not very normal. And clearly, we don't have a lot of people that come to these things. And something that I've been hearing from all of you and the staff since January, I would say, is that you guys really want to put together a strategic communication plan and be able to talk to the residents more. And I think that with this millage rate increase or potential millage rate increase, this is a really good time for you to execute on whatever those plans are, whether that's educational sessions, more town halls. I think that this is, I don't want to talk about the lake maintenance situation necessarily, but I think that this has the potential to have that kind of reaction. And I think if we can get ahead of it and you guys can communicate these things simply and clearly, because there is a ton of nuance in all of this, I do think that the residents would appreciate it, and you won't have every single person in here yelling at you come next month. So I just want to encourage you guys to think about that a little bit more and execute on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy DeNarbriga, 4641 Ridge. What she said. It is within your power to do something that many residents have asked you to do, and that's to have the meetings later. It's one way. You have the power to make accommodations to their needs. So I really encourage the kind of suggestions that I've heard. Early executive session is great because you're fresher. Those are usually very difficult sessions requiring you to be on the top of your game. Doing it at 9:30 does not work. I can attest to that. And I love the idea about folding in more public comment. So here it is at, I don't know what time it is. I haven't eaten dinner yet, so watch out. People are not going to come late if there's only one if there's two public comment, and the first one's over in the first 15 minutes, and they have to wait 2.5 hours to do the next opportunity. So if nothing else, but do consider changing the times. I did want to just very quickly address the art because I am an artist and have been for a long time. I love the idea, but I want to just remind you that we have a public art space that we're not using. Let us activate the one that we have. What makes us think we can activate two more if we can't keep one going? Stephanie, Councilwoman Kohler, excuse me, I appreciate you lifting up community living walls. Research them because my knowledge of them, though limited, they don't include a lot of community participation. Art wall, thank you, Councilwoman Hall, for bringing up the maintenance issue, and also Councilman Thomas Torrent about the curation. I just want to say that curation involves taste and aesthetics. Taste and aesthetics is a function of culture. We will have a little tiny culture war right on our borders in a heartbeat. I would like for you to think about not having a rotating exhibit, but one kick-ass public installation that can be built for ongoing maintenance, that will have some change built into it, whether it's the wind or the sun or the rain. You can actually pay the artist for doing it, which is something I have heard nobody mention so far, the artist's compensation for enlivening these spaces. But it might be a simpler solution to put a permanent installation in there. Georgia Council for the Arts deadlines are in early February for starting July 1st, up to $5,000 matching grant. And we'll remind you that Division of Tourism is the parent organization of the Georgia Council for the Arts. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
You're done. Since that is all the public, unless someone else just magically appears, I'd say we are finished with public comment, reports and other businesses. City Manager Hawthorne, the SPR report for May 2025.
I think we've covered everything that needs to be covered on the SPR.
Okay. Reports from council. Let's start with Councilmember Kohler. Councilmember Torrent.
Looking forward to tomorrow and Thursday and Friday.
Councilmember Hull.
I mean, just to piggyback off that, I think, just to state for the record that we have been talking about creating a shared calendar with all the goings-ons of DeKalb County and try to spread ourselves out so we can meet and greet and make the connections that need to be made, like Melanie Hanna mentioned earlier.
And that's in regards to meetings held, whether it's Georgia Municipal Association, DeKalb Municipal Association, Decide DeKalb, the Department of Tourism for DeKalb County, et cetera. There's just also county commissioners, state representatives have meetings, so trying to come up with a process so that we know we're covering as much of those as we can. Councilmember Lose, you ready to divvy? I think we need T-shirts.
Divvy Wednesday.
I have nothing else to add at this point. So do we have a motion to adjourn this to go into executive session? Is that the next step, Chris?
Yes, sir, for personnel and pending or potential litigations, please.
Okay, so do we have a motion to close out the work session, to adjourn the work session?
I motion.
Wait, sorry.
We're not
You
adjourned.
No, we're
don't need
not
to adjourn
adjourning.
the
We're-
work
we're-
session. All you need to do is move to
Move
go
into executive session. Okay, so
I motion to move into executive session.
do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Go home and eat.